Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name's Satyadasa, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about a subject which probably all have something to say about, and that is pleasure. Probably got quite a bit to say about pleasure and renunciation. You might not have so much to say about renunciation. I'm more of a pleasure on the pleasure end of the spectrum than the renouncing, but we'll see what we have to say. And this is the last in our evening talking about Milarepa, and there's loads of stories about Milarepa, but our story is quite simple, really. I'm imagining he's a sort of late middle-aged man. I don't know why I think he's that age. He's fallen asleep by the side of the road or a path once already in this particular day, and he's had a dream. And in the dream he's experienced this, what they call the darkinis, these embodiments of awakened energy. And he's taken this as a kind of prophecy that he's going to have a meeting with someone. We're in Tibet here, we're in the mountains of Tibet, the bleak kind of landscapes of that part of the world, and it's the 10th century, let's say. I think that's right, maybe the 11th. And Milarepa is a wandering ascetic, so he's fallen asleep, he wakes up and he wanders along, and then, I don't know, maybe he gets a bit tired again and he decides to lie down and have another nap. And he's just a cotton-clad yogi. That's what his name means, I think, or it doesn't quite mean that, but I think repa means cotton-clad. And so it's not even very clad. He's almost exposing the bits that need to be covered. It's kind of not, it's very ragged. He's a very ragged, thin man. Lived in the mountains. So as he's lying there asleep, he's had this history where in his early life he was his parents died and he was adopted by his uncle and treated very badly, treated as a sort of domestic slave. Him and his sister were very poorly treated by that side of the family. He brewed up a revenge. This is the story, a fantasy of deep revenge, and he used the powers that were the kinds of powers people used in those times. He couldn't exactly wage physical war against his relatives. He was just a young man, but he was quite adept at black magic, so he learned under various magicians to direct ill will, and they had whole systems for directing ill will. I imagine if you're from a system where that is a believed thing, maybe it's a thing, I don't know. But if that was and he was successful, he managed to kill a lot of his relatives. So he set off. He knew he knew that he had to find some answers to life. He knew that he was. In a way, he was in deep trouble. He knew quite a lot about Buddhism. He knew about the Dharma, and that was part of the culture there. And he knew that he had to do something about his life because he was heading for hell. That was the story. He knew that if he wasn't able to make progress in this life, I mean that's a traditional Buddhist teaching that. You can be destined to be reborn in a state of terrible suffering, where you lose the human realm. The human realm is a gift, according to Buddhism. It's a gift that you're given. You're given it by Mother Nature, by whatever you're given it by. It's not really yours. It's a gift, and it has certain qualities. The human realm. It has the ability to be aware, the ability to grow, the ability to love, the ability, and it has the ability to understand something about reality. But you can lose that, according to Buddhism, and you can fall into states where that becomes, if not impossible, extremely, extremely difficult. Any kind of growth in realms that are full of real suffering that doesn't seem to end. The quality of hell in Buddhism is that it at least has the quality of going on forever. Not that it does, apparently. These are things beyond my knowledge, but at least the idea of hell really is a state. And I think psychologically we can appreciate this. Hell is a state that you feel is never ending, a state of suffering you feel is going on forever. So he thought that's what his destiny was, and he had a vision of meeting this teacher. I won't go through his whole story. He eventually did meet this teacher called Marpa. This Marpa just put him through ordeals, really, to kind of try to, firstly, to sort of test him. So he made him build towers out of bricks and rubble and rock. And every time he built a tower, this was not a small tower. This was not sort of a children's tower. These are big, big towers. And every time he nearly completed it, his teacher would come along and say, "I didn't tell you to build it there," or "I didn't tell you to build it in that shape. Knock it down and do it again over there as a triangle or a circle or something." He put him through what would be regarded as an ordeal, a humiliation, a kind of a cruelty, almost, you could say. This was this deep bond that sustained this relationship. It's very profound. It's very difficult to find an analogue in our culture for this kind of meeting between a guru, and a disciple. It sounds like it should be banned. We should have a word with safeguarding about it. It's not right. But he went through this ordeal, and in a way it tested, maybe he felt the deep unfairness of the situation, maybe he felt despair, maybe he felt all these things, but he had to have the staying power to stay with all those incredibly, incredibly difficult suffering states. That was the practice. We go on retreat and we have really nice conditions and we can still suffer. We can complain about having to share a room or whatever it is. So he obviously had a deep faith buried underneath. He had a deep faith that this was a meaningful thing for him to do, to suffer so much. So he suffered, and the story goes that eventually he did get the teachings from his guru, and he went off into the mountains and then spent, let's say, decades in retreats, in mountain retreats, feeling ever increasing joy, ever increasing happiness and freedom. And he sung these songs. He sung songs of joy. So all that's happened, and that he's lying asleep on this path near a pool, a spring, and maybe something that is a body of water called Silver Spring, and a horse it comes along with a rider, and he wakes up and he sees this young man, and the young man just looks down on this poor creature by the side of the road. And maybe if we saw him, we would probably feel a bit of sympathy for this, or it may be slightly embarrassing because he's not properly clothed, or he just looks a bit wretched, possibly. And this young man is dressed. He's got a very fine horse. He's got fine clothes. He's got his weapon. He's got his sword. He's got his sashes and all that garments of a young kind of noble man. And Milarepa says, could you give me a lift across the river? Could you give me a lift across to the other side? I'll get blown away by the current. I won't be able to cross. And this young man sort of thinks, no, I don't think so. He just tells him, no, I'm on my way. I'm off to see my friends or something. I'm good. You'll get across. See you later. He starts to take his horse across the river. At which point Milarepa is said to do something, to enter one of his famous states of freedom of heart and mind, and this magic almost that he has within himself. And he walks across the water, walks past the horse, and stands on the further bank. And as the young man gets to the other side of the bank, the other side of the river, gets off his horse and demands to see Milarepa's feet. and actually sort of touches them to see if they are wet and they're dry. So this is, of course, presents the young... He comes up with various kind of rational explanations as to how that feat may have been achieved, and can't find anybody. And then he realises a mistake that he's made in not... Well, he perceives it as a mistake, and he sort of tries to apologise and say, I should have carried you across. And he starts to prostrate and do things that you would traditionally do if you, in a society like that, you would recognise, gosh, I've met somebody here. Well, we would do it, wouldn't we? I think I might do it if I saw someone walk across water. So the motif, walking across water, is the motif, and I don't know, like in all Buddhist tradition, there is a sense that when you meet someone and you can have a personal encounter with someone, sometimes this can be so strong that it can turn your whole sense of reality upside down. And it's like, it's so shocking that it would almost seem like a revelation that things are completely the other way around, as though, dense things can go above light things, like it would just seem like that. So you could take that as a motif, or you could just believe people walk on water. That is another option. But it's as a motif, it's like this young man was presented with something which was so outside of his normal range in this encounter with Milarepa that he couldn't, it just had this sense of being turning things on their head. So we're turning... In Milarepa, he's noticed something. Something has awakened in him in this encounter, which is so far beyond all the preoccupations that he's had with his life up to that point. So he starts to offer Milarepa things. He starts to give him his things. And he has a lot of really lovely things, like a really lovely saddle. He has, as I say, weaponry. He probably has jewels and other trophies. I was reading Beowulf recently, which is like half of the book. It's all about these sort of Swedish warriors and Geats, I think they're called, and they're always admiring each other's swords, and this sword was given to me by a son of Eclauth, son of, and like every single thing has a kind of provenance and a real weight, and it was like that in this culture too. The things that you have are unique things. They're not, you would know who had made them. They would be precious. A lot of your wealth would have been carried on you because they didn't have banks and things like that. So he's giving away his horse. He gives away his horse. He tries to give Milarepa one thing after another, all these precious things. And Milarepa says, I don't need them. I don't need that. And more, he says, actually, you've got a horse, but I've got the power of meditation. He says, you've got this, but actually I've got this, and this is way better. So he just rejects all these offers, and the young man feels a bit okay. And then he tries to give him some clothes. He says, can just take some clothes, because... And he doesn't say this, but what in this book... I'm getting a lot of this from this book, Yoga's Joy. Sangharakshita points out that the young man was probably being, a bit horrified, although because he would have had a sense of propriety. You can't walk around looking like that. Like the sense of they're sort of embarrassed by the nakedness, and then Milarepa made some great metaphor about real nakedness or real embarrassment. What's really embarrassing is your state of your mind, not the state of my body, and things like that. And so the young man then tried to ingratiate himself by, where are you going? Like, you don't get... And Milarepa said, I'm off to this place called Nyanan. And the man said, don't go there. They're rough types over there. They're just, sort of xenophobia. They're the people in the other valley who are a bit, not well mannered. And Sangharakshita interprets this as saying, well, the man, when you try to invite someone to your house, or you're actually you're sort of trying to ingratiate yourself, and in a sense you're putting yourself in a position where you're saying, I've got all this to offer you. I'm actually subtly subtly a bit better than you. I know that when visiting dignitaries come round in Buddhist tradition, there is often a bit of a contest as to who can get them to stay at their house, and you get a bit of pride out of that. Oh, this poor monk doesn't have very much. And this guy, well, Milarepa's not even a monk. He really doesn't have much. He doesn't have anything. So there's a bit of condescension that's going on, and again, Milarepa just knocks him back. Just doesn't, I like these people. They're straightforward in Nyanan. They're unpretentious. They've got good energy. They might not be the most cultivated folk in the world, but I know where I stand with them. Not you, pretentious young man. So in a way, he's testing this young man. He does think that this man is going to be what he calls his heart son. He does think this meeting is auspicious. He thinks this man may be his disciple. He even offers to build a temple. This young man, then he starts to really give things up. He says, I won't kill any living beings. I'll give up my weapons. I'll give up my. And this is quite a big deal because you need to defend yourself in these cultures. That's not an idle thing, giving up your weapon. In the end, the young man, he's had this real awakening of faith, clearly, but he's caught because, and apparently he knew a lot about Buddhism anyway, but he's the real thing has somewhere awoken in him, what this is really pointing to. But he's not getting anywhere, and eventually he says, right, well, I'm going to kill myself right now. And he pulls out a sword or dagger and says, I'm going to kill myself because it's not going to get any better than this for me. If I can't make any progress. He's asked for this, he's asked for teachings, he's asked for all kinds of things, but he's not getting. And at that point, Milarepa changes his mind and says, and starts to praise the young man, starts to give him encouragement, saying, this is an auspicious meeting. Anyway, this is the whole story. If what happens, the young man, he says, go off, young man, and enjoy yourself, and may we meet again. So the young man is elated. He actually accepts. He's been accepted as a disciple, which is the main thing that happened. He's been accepted by Milarepa. He goes off. In a few months, he returns with a friend, with more offerings, more gifts for Milarepa. Different place, obviously. And Milarepa is delighted to see him and sends him and his friend away to another teacher in a monastery somewhere else. And says, go and learn under this teacher. I think that's the story, actually. It just says, go and learn under this teacher. Now, how do you get any meaning out of these stories? It's not easy. Sangharakshita's book is really remarkable because he just unpacks. He has this way of unpacking the meaning of stories. And what he says is that Milarepa embodies a teaching which is a really fierce teaching. It's in a way it's quite. This young man simply wasn't ready to receive the teachings that Milarepa could give him. This is a young man who would have grown up with fine things, with a healthy sense of taking pleasure in life. This is what we hear about this guy. He was very untroubled by neurotic worries about pleasure and enjoying his life and having the fine things, and he didn't have any hang-ups around any of that. He was very straightforward. He had enjoyed those things, and in a way what he needed to do next in his spiritual journey was to find within himself some of those pleasures, something that would take the place of that worldly life, which was not a bad life. He didn't have a whole store of evil deeds to overcome in his life. He hadn't done things that would be heavily weighing on his conscience. But he had this life which was full of good things and refinement in a certain worldly sense, like pleasure. So he had to find something. The next stage of his spiritual journey was to realize that the spiritual life is full of beauty, full of joy, full of pleasure. And Milarepa, the teachings that he would have given him would probably be just too difficult to absorb. The kind of lifestyle that Milarepa lived would just be so hard for anyone to really just grow into, just because Milarepa is the archetype of renunciation. He's an archetype of renunciation. So I'm going to talk a bit about renunciation and pleasure. So renunciation, let's have a little collective think about what we can renounce. Let's just get it out there. What could you renounce? Anyone? Started for 10. Yep. Chocolate. That's a classic Buddhist thing to renounce. It means I'm too polite to say sex, or anything else. Okay, yeah, chocolate. Yeah, anything else? Alcohol, yeah. Social media, yeah. Social media, that would be really difficult. That sounds harder than chocolate, yeah. Envy, so you've moved from, we've had things and then we've had social media, like just going back to, we'll come to envy, but social media, what are you renouncing there?
Scrolling from TikTok.
TikTok.
I don't know.
Yeah, so just like the particular things.
Yeah.
What are you really giving up though?
Instant pleasure.
There's instant pleasure sometimes, yeah. What else?
Distraction.
Giving up distraction, yeah.
Validation. Validation.
Validation, yeah. In social media, but because of the sort of likes and that kind of engagement, yeah.
The taste of meat.
The taste of
food, the meat, fish,
Yeah.
anything dairy.
Yeah, you could take certain vows to give up meat or some other kind of food. Yeah, you could give that up. So there's sort of sensory things that we could give up, aren't there? There's our possessions. Let's start with our possessions. What are you giving up when you give up your possessions? Security, that's probably the big one, isn't it? You're giving up some underlying... I didn't see who said that. I think, sorry. You're giving up an underlying sense of that these things that I gather around me are going to kind of somehow make me secure. I've been to quite a lot of monastic settings in my life, not a few anyway, and they're not allowed to kind of pile up books in their rooms, and if lay people give them food, they're not allowed to sort of store more than a couple of, I think it's like a day's food. You can't sort of start your own little larder in your monk, and you can't get your bookcase going, So even at that level, you can get security out of that kind of thing. But then there's deeper levels of security that we get out of. There's kind of real security that we might get out of possessions, and then there's, why is it so hard to get rid of your books that you don't read or your, identity. You get
That's part of what's in possessions.
Yeah. There's so much caught up in possessions, isn't there? When my wife says, let's throw out some stuff, and she's thinking of my stuff, I really start to shake because she is not attached to my stuff. You start off with that really gung-ho thing. Yeah, right, really, don't need Emily Bronte anymore. Don't need Jane Austen novels. I'm beyond all that. Actually, I'll keep that one, or like, maybe I will read that again, or, or your clothes, your old clothes that you just don't use anymore. You've got identity, there's attachment, and there's memory, there's, I don't know what it is, really. When you do get rid of a load of stuff, you do feel that lightness. So you kind of do, that does emerge. Probably we all have really like, we probably all have some things that are analogous to what this young man was giving up, these these really precious possessions. It might not be that it's our, most valuable items like a laptop or whatever's your valuable, even your bike or your car. It might be that there's some things that are really precious to us, that have been with us, that have real meaning and connection that we'd find very hard to lose. This isn't a doctrine of just giving everything away. This is noticing that in possessions there is a lot of identity attachment. So really, when we give up possessions, we'd be giving up ownership, right? On one obvious level, but that sense, the way that identity, sense of this is me, mine, can gather around even fairly trivial stuff. There's possessions. There's social media brought up a lot of other things that were probably in a similar territory to possessions, and then Matthew, you said something envy. So you started to point to giving up internal mindset, giving up negative. What other things could you give up? Sloth. Yeah. Anger. That's a hard one. Blame, probably that's a big one, isn't it? Blame, moaning, that kind of stuff. Comparing. Like all those mental tendencies and views, you could give them up.
Yeah.
This is the real territory of spiritual practice, is to change the mind, and all of the possessions and the other worldly things that we could give up will also be, partly in our minds what all that is. Why we're attached to them. What else could we give up? Pride. Yep. Memories. You give up memories.
Well, memory in general. Losing memories.
Would you? I mean, you could just lose your memory because you forget. Is that what you mean, or do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could. You could lose.
Realizing that you don't remember a few things.
Yeah. We can give up. I guess we can give up insistent stories as well about ourselves and about life, can't we? We can give up. We can really change. We can even give up the views that we have about ourselves. This is different. This is really
Attachment to harmful memories.
Attachment to harmful memories.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant. Thank you.
Like sort of letting things go, like having a sense of peace with the past, or yeah. What else? I mean, you can give up. What do monks give up? No, not monks actually, but what do they say in the Buddhist tradition? You give up your family identity when you go forth. And in those kind of societies, you would, your family was a place of protection. It still is, obviously to some degree, although not quite as viscerally perhaps as in these kind of cultures that we're in here. You'd give up your family. That doesn't mean to say that you would not see your family or renounce your family in a kind of sort of disown. It's not to do with disowning your family. It's giving up that. All the identity that goes along with being part of a group, and here family would mean wider family and probably your whole sort of kin network, that whole network of all the beliefs and the ideas and the grudges and property and all of that goes along with that. So you can give up a lot, and Milarepa is the archetype of having really given up so much, renounced things. He's also the archetype of joy and the archetype of freedom, and he's an archetype of this movement that you can make in spiritual practice between having a life that's based around desiring desiring things, possessions, people, ideas, status, wealth, even religious identity or any kind of an identity, in a way that attaches and clings to that, whether it's the senses, whether it's the very body, whether it's the mind, and you're giving up a certain way that you have of desiring that we can really get something out of this life, this body, these senses, this temporary sort of circumstance in which we find ourselves. This is called desire for karma, desire for body, karma chanda. It's this hope, this wish that we can fulfill ourselves through this kind of pleasure. And he has turned that round into the desiring of the Dharma, the desiring of a pleasure which arises not from the sense realm, but rises from ultimately from faith and knowledge and insight. But it's also going to arise at other levels from the practice of ethics, from generosity, and it's going to arise from all kinds of positive emotion. So in a sense it arises from within. This is the beauty of what we desire on the Buddhist path. So he's realised this to a very high degree. He's the archetype of joy. So what he said with this young man is we need that, he said, go and live in a monastery. And in this monastery, he's going to have contact with other practitioners, other friends, other monks. He's going to have the joy of friendship. He's going to learn meditation practices which give rise to beautiful states of mind. He's going to perform rituals, pujas. He's going to be in a world of colour and sound and a sort of musical tradition. So he's going to be in a learning ground where he can learn to find joy and pleasure and beauty in the spiritual life. So we can't skip over enjoyment. This is what Sangharakshita makes very clear in his take on this thing that Milarepa does, sending this man off to a monastery. Doesn't sound that enjoyable, does it, being sent off to a monastery? When I was young, I remember the idea of being sent to a monastery. It was just something I saw in films, I guess, where people were sent to a monastery as it was definitely a punishment. It was definitely not a good thing. I didn't mean a Buddhist monastery necessarily, but because I was watching things about Christian monasteries. But that was my feeling. This was a punishment. But anyway, he's been sent off to a monastery, and in order to sustain a kind of a sense of this, maybe this deep connection. Maybe you've had it. Maybe you've been on a retreat and you've felt deeply that there's something that's resonant with you, something that you can't really put into words. We need to kind of realise that that enjoyment, pleasure, beauty is not to be abandoned if we're going to practice spiritual life. It's to be slowly and gradually refined so that it really nourishes us, and so that in the end it becomes a source of inner wealth and great joy. When I was 22, I joined the community upstairs, and I was really trying to think what were my pleasures when I was 22. They all sound really good to me now. They're all still things I'd really quite want. They're not different. What was my... Sangharakshita says the tantric view, and I really like the tantric view of pleasure, is that it's the use of energy. It's where your energy opens up, and you're engaged. I mean, I've seen that in you see that in children, don't you? You see they're just happily playing. You could say they're in a state of pleasure. They're just their energy is just being used. And the opposite of pleasure is when you're stuck, when you're knotted up, when your energy is not going anywhere. Well, my energy has wanted to go into, I loved communicating, talking to people, talking late into the night. I loved laughing with people. I loved, I had to write them down. Where did I write them down? That's so far away now. See, my eyesight's gone. I can't enjoy myself quite as much in various ways now. I loved sport. I loved using body. I loved drinking. I liked films, books, music, sex, drugs. There was, varying amounts of all those things. Books more. Steady friend, the book, through the years. Steady friend. It was very reliable. Same amount of pleasure. I was 80. I was just a good book by the fireside. But, all those things, it'd be fruitless to say that these were not pleasures. But so when I was here and I'd been on retreats, I was really, this Dharma was amazing. These were people who were living the practice who I was very impressed by, and I wanted, I just felt like I wanted to be involved. So I lived upstairs for a few years. Somehow that whole relationship with my pleasures did come into question in my mind at certain points. I thought, is that all right? I always felt it was all right. I didn't really have sometimes I had to acknowledge that it wasn't very pleasurable, my pleasures. That was another thing. When it's actually just looking back at the pleasures, I'm wondering how many times I really enjoyed myself. Like I did enjoy myself, but often pleasures can have a lot of pleasure in the remembering, but when you're actually, how much pleasure was I really having, and how much was I just sort of thinking about pleasure or trying to line up pleasure but there was pleasure. Let's just say that. So I had to sort of reconcile this life that I wanted to live, which was here, which was going on retreats. It was meditating in the shrine room every morning. It was studying Dharma, with this urge to go out and have fun, actually. And I used to talk about it quite a lot in the meetings. I just said, I'm not having any fun here. This is not fun. And I felt very unhappy, actually. I was in a sort of conflict for a good few years, quite a few years, where I would not really be able to honestly say that I was really attracted to living in the community, going on retreats, doing pujas. I did them, and perversely, I did recognise that I got quite a lot from doing them, and in a sense, I did love them, and I did love my life living with others, with other guys. I was here for 6 years, and I felt a great love for these men and women who are teaching me, and this character of Sangharakshita in the background who had sort of taught this Dharma. I felt a great love for it. I felt really like this was the most meaningful thing that I could. What had opened up for me was more meaning than I had ever expected. It was opening up something in me that was unprecedented and unlooked for. In that sense, it's a bit like the young man. I don't want to compare myself to the heart son of Milarepa, but he just came upon Milarepa, and something was revealed, and I too felt that, and I too felt that conflict. I didn't quite draw a dagger on myself and think, this is it, I'm going to kill myself now because I'm not going to get any better than this. But I had a great deal of faith that there was a path that had opened up. I had not come to expect this in my life. It wasn't that I was looking for it. It wasn't preluded in any way in my cultural upbringing. Religion wasn't a thing that was, or spirituality, or call it what you like. I had a very good childhood, but it didn't contain any of that. And there was a conflict because I felt actually, there's so many other things. There's there's pleasures that I feel like I haven't exhausted. in life. I feel like I want more of certain things, and also the more complex type of pleasures that are a bit less pleasurable actually. They're more to do with how I think my life should pan out in terms of how am I going to be happy in my life. You know, all the cultural things that I've been given, the things that I've imbibed about what it means to have a happy life and therefore have some pleasure and enjoyment in life. All those things that don't really, on analysis, work. How are we doing? So what's the issue at the heart of pleasure then? What's the question about pleasure? I think it's like assessing in yourself, you know, where is this thing that I'm doing that I'm kind of desiring and wanting. Sometimes it's just straightforward pleasure, but in the long term or the short term, does this seeking of this pleasure in this way, is it going to blunt my awareness? Is it going to limit my relationships with others? Is it just going to does it make me careless or even aggressive? Does it vitiate my ability to carry out my life goals, you know? So it's not the pleasure itself very often. If the pleasure that we're in the Buddhist terms, if the pleasure that you're seeking involves hurting others or harming others in one way or another, that is one thing. But if it's a pleasure that is more, you know, that doesn't involve that, the question is, what is our attitude to that? Is there unconsciousness around the way that we're approaching what we want, what we desire, what we think will give us pleasure? Or are we just sustaining an old idea of what our sources of pleasure are that has just run dry, and it's costing us quite a lot in terms of how to keep that alive in our lives, to sort of prop up our imagined pleasure? Or are our pleasures more about, you know, status and wealth and what we have, rather than being really pleasures actually? That makes sense. There's simple pleasures and complex pleasures. I got confused thinking about this. So I thought I'd just talk about simple pleasures. And then I'll talk about working in meditation, and then that'll be it. That'll be the end. So what would be a simple pleasure? What would be a vision of being simple pleasures? What are they? Not ones that involve complexity. Taste. Yeah, just tasting, enjoying food, enjoying chocolate. Yeah, simple pleasure. Yeah.
Getting enough sleep.
Yeah, feeling rested. Yeah, that's a really nice pleasure. Yeah. Contemplation. Yeah, say more about that.
Having the time to pause and just look at something,
Yeah.
finding it beautiful.
Isn't that just a great pleasure? Yeah, that really is. My contemplation, often I'm happiest if I can just sit with a cup of tea and just do nothing, and just look at something, look out the window, or just think. Actually, thinking has a bad press, but I like it. Just sit thinking. Yeah, and that can be really, really joyful. Actually, I mean, that's one of the great pleasures if you ever get to go on a solitary retreat. You know, you just get time to almost bathe in your mind, just to, and that pleasure then, like, bathing in your mind is a nice thing. It sounds really nice. Of course, if your thoughts are all caught up with, you know, craving and aversion and comparison and judgment and stuff, it's not pleasant to experience your mind. But yeah, if you're sort of having a sort of bodily, usually it comes with a sort of bodily relaxation as well. The heart is a bit open, and you can just be more aware. You know, it doesn't have to be a formal meditation practice. There's lovely moments. What else? Simple pleasures.
Being around nature.
Being out in nature, yeah, for sure. Yeah, just like there can be deeply pleasurable. I'm saying this is on retreat because very often simple pleasures are what you get on retreat actually, and they're the things that are really missing, that make your life a bit frenetic, anxious, and unhappy. So you step outside. You've been meditating. You step outside the shrine room, and you just, I don't know. It's like the cold air can be really pleasant or something, or you see the stars if it's night, or just smelling smoke from a fire, or seeing, just some natural thing. Yeah, hugely pleasurable, really simple. Do we do it much? Maybe. Yeah. What else?
I would say just being.
Say again?
Just being.
Just being. Yeah, that sounds a bit like just sort of contemplating, just being, yeah. Companionship, I think that's a brilliant one, yeah. I mean, I think that is so much, when I'm in a kind of a difficulty, a state of mind which I find is habitual, or like, what it would be like, I've lost perspective, or I'm got into a little corner of poor me and the world's like this. Actually, just being with a friend, just chatting with a friend, it just appeases so much, so much just dissolves in the face of simple friendship, companionship. Yeah, I think that's a simple pleasure.
Movement.
Movement, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, all just the simple things of the body, feeling the body not in pain. So I would say those are all simple pleasures. No doubt there's loads more. Is it easy to live like that? Does that I wonder whether we do. We just miss a lot of these simple pleasures a lot of the time, and we sort of say that's because I imagine like Milarepa would be enjoying things at that level. He would just be enjoying all of those things.
I think it's quite hard to like if I try and do that, all the thoughts come in about like what I'm not doing,
Yeah.
what I could be doing,
Yeah.
or what will happen in the future,
Yeah.
or anything like that, and that is what gets in the way of just
Yeah.
enjoying all
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah, we're just locked into our sort of complex plans for a happy life, aren't we? We're locked into all of our thoughts about life. And there's subjective difficulties in life, aren't there, that they're going to make life hard. Making a living can be hard. Servicing all our property can be hard. When I was thinking about this, I thought probably it's actually part of the path of spiritual practice. If we're lucky enough to come across a teacher and find a sangha, and then contribute to that sangha and try and help that sangha grow and build that, is that we're going to start cultivating in our lives all those things which will just naturally allow us to be more simply happy. Yeah. It's just really difficult to be just simply happy in this culture. Well, maybe it's just difficult in any culture, I don't know, to be just simply happy, because why? Why is it difficult to be simply happy? Do say if it's not, as well. Emails? Yeah.
Because our culture's so mind-driven.
It's so mind-driven, we're sort of living in a little parallel world to our actual physicality, so we're tense, aren't we, a lot of the time, and our jobs and our often force us into that tenseness. So often when you sit down to meditate, you're actually in a state of physical tension, which is unpleasant to experience. So yeah.
You can't make money with simple happiness.
You can't make money with.
Sell it.
You can't sell it. No, actually, you can sell things through a vision of it. That's very common. capitalism. Yeah, there's lots of capitalism, isms. There's all kinds of things that, you know, drive us around, and what else?
The heightened emphasis on I, me, my, and self
Yeah.
in society.
And what does that cause?
I guess when we're thinking about beauty, that constant emphasis on I, me, mine, and self kind of, I assume, makes people look in rather than look out.
Yes.
So it's easy then to miss natural beauty when the emphasis is on
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that could be said about this, and probably not time now to talk about all the things that we grow. But for me, like, you know, having a community and having a sense of solidarity with people who are trying to live out roughly the same ideals. I don't know what ideals you've all got. Ideals are a mysterious thing, but having friendship in that way with others is really, really important. Some sort of connection to the natural world, you know. We talk about that so much, and it's so elusive what that even means in our culture. You know, we can just reduce that to just going on nice trips out into nature, and that's good, and that's all great. But having reverence for something higher, having reverence for some path, some teaching, that's also part of the practice. Cultivating gratitude, having a clear conscience. These are all things that we cultivate in practice. And I've known, and I will attest to many people who I've known personally, who I feel do have a lot of these qualities. And not just Buddhists, but I know I've happened to have known a lot of Buddhists who do, through their practice, through meditation, through kind of the discipline of noticing when your mind is tending towards unskillful things and skillful things, as we say, ethics, through meditation, through building community, through going on retreats, going on solitary retreats, who do actually have quite a lot of these things that I'm calling simple pleasures in their lives. They do just arise quite naturally. They just start to arise from the kind of mind that you cultivate through practice, because ultimately, whether you can really enjoy something is a matter of your mind. It's not, you know, it isn't. It comes through your mind. You know that thing. Sometimes you pay for a massage and you just don't enjoy it because your mind can't really get into it. I usually enjoy the last 10 minutes, and then I want another one straight away, whatever. Because what you enjoy is determined by your mind, and so by working on the mind, you're actually creating the kind of mind that can enjoy things, can enjoy food, can enjoy sensory experience. There's nothing at all wrong with that in the path. In fact, that is absolutely fundamental. You're not going to... it goes a bit further than that. In Buddhism, there's people who are primarily driven, this is a category, by doctrine, by a sense of the suffering of life, by a sense of the Buddhist practice is teaching you that you can really kind of escape from this suffering through the practice, right? So this is called doctrine following. And then there's people who are primarily driven by a sense of joy and beauty and faith. And these are called faith followers. There's the doctrine followers and the faith followers. That for them, the primary thing is what amazing beauty there is in this ideal. And that's what draws and leads them on. Of course, we really both need both. We need, there's going to be potential pitfalls in either of those approaches taken to an extreme. So we can find pleasure in meditation, and I'll end with this. So we can find pleasure in meditation. Let's end with something that Sangharakshita writes, 151. He says, the important thing is to learn to find pleasure in a way that is in harmony with your higher aspirations or ideals, Otherwise, like everyone else, you're going to be caught up in what passes for pleasure in the ordinary world. In other words, an endless cycle of superficial pleasures and nagging frustrations, petty likes and dislikes, habitual and unconsidered preferences. If Buddhahood is the state of non-duality at the highest level, attachment to worldly pleasures is the complete opposite, a product of the reactive or dualistic mind at the lowest level, which constantly reinforces our need to define ourselves according to our likes and dislikes. The quickest and easiest way to gain Buddhahood in one lifetime is thus not to make much of your likes and dislikes, and thereby free yourself from attachment to them. Conversely, the easiest way to block your progress towards Buddhahood is to be picky. So when we're working meditation, and as we're kind of becoming aware of the mind, and noticing that the preferences that are in the mind, that I like this state, I don't like that state. And within meditation practice, awareness creates a vessel within which we can really start to unlock the energy that's caught up in pettiness and in liking and disliking and identifying this as right and this is wrong and this is bad and this is good. And that can open up, and that's a natural resource that we have. In meditation, you can't enjoy meditation all the time. You can't sensorially enjoy your body all the time. Obviously, that would be ridiculous. But when you can start to open up, it's going beyond sort of the pettiness of the mind and seeing things as energies. Even seeing, you're caught up cravings and your dislikes and your hatreds even as energy, and freeing that energy, and that can really be unblocked. If you practice meditation at all, you'll know this, that your body can start to feel lighter, your whole being can lighten, and it can be intensely pleasurable. So meditation is a way of finding pleasure, and it's not it may be something we can emphasize when we practice more, that we can actively look for what is pleasurable, because your mind wants that, your mind is inclined to that. I will say one more thing, that is just, the whole question of beauty. I've talked in terms of pleasure and joy and things like that, but there's beauty as well. So I'm talking about what is it that refines the mind, and of course art, and all of art, whatever your favourite art is. Art refines the mind. Rituals that we do, devotional rituals, refine the mind. I haven't got time to talk about that. I want to end with Milarepa. So let's end with Milarepa, and we'll chant his mantra to bring the class to an end, and to bring this series to an end. We'll leave him with his mantra, so we can just try and let Milarepa speak directly to us. He is an archetype that is extreme, and his whole life was extreme in a way that ours is unlikely to be, but we can hear that, and that's what he's doing there. He's listening to the Dharma. He's listening to that. And we can hear that. There is something in us that is beyond, that knows and recognises something that is beyond the senses. It's even beyond thought. Certainly beyond greed, hatred and delusion. And the path is one of increasing letting go, and at the same time, through that letting go, be it of possessions or negative emotions or relationships that are just harmful, it's about beauty, it's about joy, it's about awakening love, it's about awakening the heart, and the pleasure that flows along with that. And he is an archetype of both those things, taken to a really high pitch. So we'll end with the Milarepa mantra to close this series. and I will lead it. Ma Guru Hasavadrahum 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 Ma Guru Hasavadrahum. So that's all for this evening. Thank you for being here. Thank you if you joined online. Next week we start a new series, which is... Have we got one more? A bonus week has been thrown in. Just when you thought Milarepa had gone. No, there is a bonus week. Oh, good. All right, so we'll see what he gets up to next week. Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.